Hi there. This is a short preview of a longer analysis series that I'm working on, examining how several major TV series performed this past difficult year, and trying to be as objective as possible looking at the facts, the statistics. I'm cross-referencing their streaming viewership numbers and their production costs, and ultimately to compare about a dozen major shows to House of the Dragon, because this is a Westeros-themed YouTube channel. But that's all going to be in a much longer video. For this preview, I'm going to focus down on just the Wheel of Time, because right after Season 3, which aired at the beginning of this year, Amazon Prime canceled Wheel of Time, even though all the fans and critics said this was their best season yet, and it was performing relatively well. The numbers actually do back that up. To succinctly give you the conclusion up front, Wheel of Time Season 3 did have slightly lower viewership than House of the Dragon Season 2, not by much. However, any difference in that is offset by the fact that Wheel of Time simply had a much lower production cost. If you cross-reference those, Wheel of Time's cost-benefit ratio was actually comparable to House of the Dragon, by which I mean neck and neck even, which is in stark contrast to some other shows in the past year which really struggled, that either saw their season-to-season viewership numbers drop in half, or which had ridiculously high production budgets that were in no way justified by the viewership they were pulling in. And there's multiple examples for both of those categories. So there is a full video where it makes even more sense in context of all these other shows, but in this video, just between these two shows, I'm going over viewership statistics and production costs. That these are objective figures. This is math. Cold, hard math. Which makes it more difficult to argue against. So my hope is that Wheel of Time fan channels can use this evidence I've gathered, all this info, to help strengthen their campaigns to get another streamer to save the show. That I think the front runner is they really hope Apple TV might be able to pick it up. Go see their campaigns for more details on that there are fan campaigns and petitions. Every couple of days you see another news site reporting it's crossed another benchmark of so many tens of thousands of signatures. There is hope. Please keep at it. It is worth it. This was really letting them down, what Amazon did. Well, I said objective figures. There are three sets of figures I'm going to be going over. First is total viewership. This is the standard way that streaming shows are compared. This is the number they usually, like Netflix or HBO Max, they usually put these out. You need to calculate this because different shows have different runtimes. Like, if you have one show that's 6 episodes, 30 minutes each, and another that's like Andor-sized, where it's, like full hour, 60 minutes, 12 episodes, you can't just compare raw number of minutes watched. That's what the machines actually give them as a statistic on their end on the server, number of minutes watched. But it's different for different things. The way you calculate this is you take total number of minutes viewed and divide by total run time. So you can do this for one episode, you can do it averaged across an entire season. For example, if it's like one episode that's 60 minutes long, and it got 600 million minutes viewed. 600 million divided by 60 is 10 million. You'd have a total viewership calculated at 10 million. That's how this works. Another issue is, particularly for heavily serialized shows, they do better long term. Talk about this more, that this came up for Andor, that people caught up on Andor across the summer because it was so heavily serialized you couldn't just dive in missing an episode. So people would schedule it. Ideally, I'd be using the post 90 days view calculation, but not everyone puts that out. And the first night the premiere numbers can be misleading. So the best ones that I have for everyone are the post 1 week viewership numbers. Just clarifying at the beginning, everything else I'm referring to are the post 1 week numbers for calculated total viewership. All that setup out of the way, averaged for the season as a whole, House of the Dragon Season 1, which was considered a hit, which pulled in hit viewership numbers, had an average first week total of 9.5 million. Season 2 was 8.3 million. Yes, it dropped about 16%, but, and I talked about this in the other video, that when you actually go down to look at the episode-by-episode viewership, it is clear that this is all due to the 2-year gaps between seasons, that from the Season 1 finale to the Season 2 premiere, Season 2 premiere was a 14% drop, and then the viewership progressively increased as the season advanced, so it's all due to the gaps between seasons, and you'll see this on other shows like The Last of Us, just how much that's hurting us. So I'm not that worried about it, particularly because it's, acceleration, that it's growth, that it was going up as the season advanced. Still, viewership is down by about 15%. It's about 1/8, give or take. And as you'll see in the full thing with full context, compared to some of these other shows, which more than one show saw its viewership numbers drop in half because of these 2-year gaps, House of the Dragon is, relatively speaking, an island of stability compared to the full dozen shows I'm going to talk about here that were major shows in the past year. So they need to get back to batch renewal, where when you're watching a current season, they're already filming the next one. And indeed they are. I've talked about this. Even HBO has said this, looking back at 2024, that the 2-year gaps are really messing us up. Night of the Seven Kingdoms will batch renew through Season 3 and film them all at once, that they're already fixing this, but it was a problem. So, 9.5 million in Season 1, 8.3 million on average Season 2. Wheel of Time. That depends on the figures you use. That the number I got is that their first season, which released in 2021, and the date is important. Season 1 in 2021 had a total viewership average, episode average on any given episode, of about 11.2 million. Season 2 dropped to roughly 7 million, or slightly lower than 7 million, the upper sixes. Then Season 3 actually leveled off, that the season average was around 6.8, that I think there was like a 1/10 of a point higher for the Season 3 finale than there was for the Season 2 finale, even though overall it was slightly lower. That, relative to other shows that are dropping, it was more or less even with Season 2. How do we explain these numbers? Well, even fans felt that Wheel of Time Season 1 had problems, but acknowledge it was badly affected by filming at the height of the pandemic. I mean, House of the Dragon film, it was still problems. It was filming in 2021 when that was airing. No, they filmed Season 1 in 2020. That is the height of the pandemic. It caused obvious problems. I don't blame them for that. The fans understand why that happened. On the other hand, how the heck did this thing get 11.7 and drop to 7? It's 6 even at times. And that's so much higher than even House of the Dragon was on HBO. Well, you have to account for the pandemic boost. That the pandemic, while harming their ability to produce it, also drastically affected viewership numbers because everyone was trapped in their homes. Just after, it was just the pure timing that Disney Plus was always going to come out at the end of 2019, a few weeks and months before the pandemic hit. And that was the first one, then it snowballed, so then Apple came out at that same time, then eventually HBO Max. So you have all of these giant streaming launches and Netflix and Amazon upping their game to compete, just as everyone was trapped in their homes with their TVs. So it artificially inflated viewership just as these new platforms are starting out. This was an industry-wide phenomenon. talk about this more in other things, but Game of Thrones Season 7, which took 6 prior seasons to build up a strong level of viewership, was pulling in about 16 million on an average episode per week. And that isn't normal. That takes 6 prior seasons of build-up, and most shows don't run 5 seasons anymore. That is unusual because streamers want shorter things. It's a big investment. So it took almost a decade to build a show up to the point where it was pulling in 16 million, and we knew that these are unusual. These are Super Bowl numbers. During the pandemic, Mandalorian Season 2 got 30 million per week. Twice as much as Game of Thrones at the peak of its viewership in Season 7 and 8. This is unheard of, but it's unusual that there were extenuating circumstances. There was a pandemic. So that explains why Wheel of Time Season 1, despite even the fans saying this was their weakest season, they stumbled because of the pandemic, still pulled in an 11.2. And you think back, it took a while. I think this is one of the factors in the writer's strike. The studio executives refused to believe when the pandemic ended, which was around like summer 2022, things returned to normal levels. Like House of the Dragon and Lord of the Rings came out after the boost ended. Executives refused to believe on some other shows that were ongoing. What happened to the viewership? What are they doing wrong? It's because, like Marvel shows, we're wondering, why aren't we pulling in WandaVision numbers? Well, apart from the fact that they were cranking out inferior product and have recently reformed, like all the reforms they put in, starting with Agatha and Daredevil, that they've righted the ship, but we're not going to be pulling in height of the pandemic numbers again. So 7 to 9 is relatively normal for a show on Wheel of Time scale. When you consider that House of the Dragon Season 1 was considered a hit in the 9 million range. That's kind of what we're talking about. So when you compare Seasons 2 to 3, ignore that Season 1 had extenuating circumstances from the pandemic. Season 2, which came out 2023, and Season 3, which came out early 2025, the fact that the ratings are almost even, the marginal slip at really pretty much even with each other in the upper 6 million range, is impressive, particularly because it wasn't even hurt that badly by the 2-year gap between Seasons 2 and 3, when other shows are still being hurt by that kind of gap. It has a loyal viewership base. Now, it's a little less than 7 million, and I could, bicker about the exact thing. For the sake of argument, you understand, I am going to use the conservative figure that, at worst, the post-1 week average for Wheel of Time Season 3, I'm going to go with saying it was 6.5 million. It was somewhere between 6.5 and 7 million, but understand I'm using the worst-case scenario to show that even with the lowest conservative estimate, it was still doing pretty decently. You understand? And both shows actually started out nearly the same place. That House of the Dragon started around 7.4 in Season 2, but then increased, whereas Wheel of Time started like 7.1, then decreased a little, just a normal season slog. But it's not really that far behind. It was nipping at its heels, and it is quite something to have stable viewership between 2 seasons, despite a 2-year gap. That Season 3 had leveled off, which is quite an achievement in itself, and in no way can Amazon say the viewership was declining. The real measure of any show's success is its profit margin, relative to its production cost. So the second set of data is raw production cost. House of the Dragon costs around $20 million per episode. Wheel of Time costs much less than that. I'm unsure about the specifics, but I did spend a good 2 or 3 days picking through Wheel of Time Reddit threads trying to research this, because Wheel of Time fans themselves have been trying to figure out exactly how much it cost. Even then, because I said I'm using the worst case scenario, the most expensive it ever was per episode Highest figure I've heard is 16 million. Now, Game of Thrones Season 6, a given episode, the number we heard was 15 million. Obviously, a battle episode would be a lot more, but on average in the 15 million range, 16 million would be high for Wheel of Time. That there are other estimates saying it was usually closer to 10. It does vary from episode to episode, but the worst case scenario numbers I'm using are that it had a 6.5 million average viewership and 16 million for every episode. And in many ways, that's sort of like measuring Game of Thrones Season 6 using the Battle of the Bastards episode as the example for cost. That, no, that was the top of the spectrum. All of them weren't, all 10 weren't as much as the big battle episode, but sake of argument, I'm using 16 million because it's the highest number I've seen, which is still clearly lower than the 20 million on House of the Dragon. Even so, is there a better way to compare production cost? Because like viewership, well, there's different episodes, like I said, averaging it, different run times is another big factor. So the way this is measured is by cost per minute. That you take the total cost for the entire season and divide by the total runtime. And you could make one episode to episode, but we're using season to season here. I calculated this for all the shows in my main video, and for a dozen major shows in the past year, I'm telling you now, it's always a six-figure number. That it's never 1 million, but it's never below 200,000. Most are between 200,000 and 500,000. Just, there's one or two outliers that they're really expensive, like Andor was really expensive, but in the 200,000 to 500,000 range per season. House of the Dragon Season 1, in terms of cost per minute, was $326,000 per minute. The way I write in my notes is $326K. Season 2 was $313K per minute. Because they cut out the big battle at the end of it to save production costs, that shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but the low 300s, 326, 313. And it was considered a hit even in Season 1. If you're going to criticize Season 2, whatever, but in which case focus on the Season 1 numbers, that good is somewhere in the 9 million range and costing in the 300,000 per minute range. Wheel of Time, Season 3. Assuming worst case scenario that each episode cost $16 million, and it assuredly didn't. That is only what the most expensive one was, and I'm multiplying it. 16 times 8, the total season cost upper limit would be at most $128 million. Divided by the 516-minute total runtime equals a cost per minute of $248,000. Significantly less than House of the Dragon, which is in the range of the 310s to 320s. Again, I'll talk more about this in the main video, that the only ones that go up into the 400 to 500s are like Lord of the Rings or Andor, like the really most expensive things, in terms of pure cost without looking at the benefit of, well, was it pulling in viewership for that? Like Mandalorian was also in the 400 range, but 30 million per week in the pandemic, that was so worth it. Which of course brings me to my third and last set of figures. The cost-benefit ratio. This is the real measure of everything. Everything builds up to this. If you divide the total viewership by cost per minute, you get an efficiency ratio. And they make more sense in context of the other ones. That's why the longer full-hour version of this is I'm comparing the rates for 12 different shows. Because it's not like a usable number like it, but even like, well, is 9 million good compared to that other show that got 5 million? You get a sense of, well, 9 million is what a hit show gets. So using House of the Dragon Season 1 as our benchmark of this was considered successful, if we take the total viewership, 9.5 million or so, divide by $326,000 per minute, you get an efficiency ratio of 29.14. Season 2, when you factor in that it costs slightly less, but also the viewership was a little down, is 26.52. To skip ahead, I'll tell you now that successful shows on the full list are usually in the upper 20s. That's usually what's considered successful. Severance is actually at 27. That Season 1 of House of the Dragon was more efficient than Severance Season 2. Season 2 of House of the Dragon marginally less. That you think Severance doesn't have giant battle scenes in it, but it's got really expensive A-list actors, and they have to build all the sets, and it's actually a relatively short show. So in terms of cost per minute, because it's shorter than House of the Dragon is like over 60 minutes all the time, that when you do the math, Severance is actually around 27, which is still really good. Upper 20s is what you're looking at. So House of the Dragon Season 1 was at 29, Season 2, 26.5. Wheel of Time Season 3. Even assuming the worst-case scenario numbers of 6.5 million viewership divided by 248,000 per minute equals 26.21. Wheel of Time Season 3 had a directly comparable cost-benefit ratio to House of the Dragon Season 2. And not even that far behind Severance, which was, 27. So, I mean, these are fractions of a point. And I know, well, the points are arbitrary, but when you see what is considered successful or not, just to give you a preview of this, like, at the height of the pandemic, Mandalorian 2, which is the highest ratio I calculated for anything ever, was a 70. But that's because it's pulling in 30 million views, and even then it was a very expensive show. A better example would be like Ahsoka is a very successful hit post-pandemic. That was about a 40. Those are rare. It's rare for anything to get over 30. Even Severance didn't get over 30. Most successful shows are mid to upper 20s. 20-ish is respectable. Like Andor was really expensive, even though it revitalized the franchise. That was about a 19 or a 20. But for an award circuit show, it wasn't trying to be, popcorn flick. It was trying to be art. It was trying to do all that. Long-term benefit of reboosting the franchise, Andor was worth it. It's just, I think the cost per minute was somewhere in the 570s. 577 million. I know it cost $27 million per episode, but it was like a movie. It was worth it. The lowest I have recorded on anything is in the 10 to 11 range. That if Ahsoka is like a 40, which is the highest I've seen for a post-pandemic show, Severance is a 27, House of the Dragon and Wheel of Time were all in the 26 to 29 range, and were considered good. Lowest I've seen, the actual bombs, were in the 10 to 11 range. But I'll go over more of that in the main video. This is just to present and get the attention of the Wheel of Time fan channels that when you calculate the cost of viewership, this was directly comparable to the performance of House of the Dragon, Season 1 or something. This was a hit. The viewership had leveled off at a time when others were dropping. It really didn't make sense to cancel this, other than they want to get locked in for another 5 seasons, and I hope Apple does pick it up. But give you more context in the main video, so please like and subscribe.